In the thick, tangled jungles of Terrace 9, the air pulsed with the intensity of warfare. Towering trees splintered and fell as artillery fire ripped through the dense canopy. Explosions rocked the ground, mingling with the crackle of blaster bolts and the metallic clash of energy shields, as both human and alien forces collided in a brutal clash. Terrace 9, a world brimming with valuable resources, had become the latest battlefield in the relentless war between the draconian Amazon Empire and the United Earth Federation. For years, each side had fiercely contested every inch of the planet, turning it into a graveyard of soldiers and machinery. Leading the draconian forces was Commander Zyra, a towering Amazon warrior, famed for her strength and merciless approach. Her violet skin gleamed beneath the glare of Terrace 9's twin suns, and her intricately patterned armor reflected her elite rank. At over 8 feet tall, with a muscular frame that rippled with power, Zyra was a formidable presence on any battlefield. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, searched for her next target, a human soldier she deemed fragile and weak, relying too much on technology in a fight where true strength should reign. That soldier, Corporal Jason Cross, stood battered and bruised, separated from his unit and surrounded by the chaos of battle. His pulse rifle was damaged, and scorch marks covered his battered armor, a testament to his near brushes with death. Yet, despite his injuries and failing equipment, Jason remained defiant, his gaze steady as he scanned the dense jungle for any sign of rescue, though he knew it was unlikely. Zyra spotted him quickly. He looked vulnerable, an easy kill. Instinctively, she lunged at him, battle axe raised, every movement swift and deadly. But as she drew near, Jason did something unexpected. He stood still, lowering his weapon, and met her gaze with a look of resignation. For the first time in her life, Zyra hesitated. She could see resolve in his eyes, not the fear she was accustomed to. Her axe hovered inches from his head, and yet, something inside her held her back. "Do it," Jason rasped, his voice strained. Despite his exhaustion, he faced her without flinching. Zyra's grip on her axe tightened as her mind battled her instinct. Why wasn't he fighting? Why didn't he cower like so many others before him? An unfamiliar emotion surged within her, something she had never felt. Compassion. Pity. She could end him with a single strike, yet, as she held him in her powerful grip, she felt his vulnerability, his sheer courage. Her mind swirled with questions that clashed with her training. Was strength only about overpowering the weak? Or was there a deeper honor in recognizing strength in another? After a long pause, Zyra released him, turning away, her mind racing with thoughts foreign to her warrior culture. Jason staggered, barely able to hold himself up, his mind reeling. She had spared him. Why? As she disappeared into the jungle shadows, Jason realized that this war was more complex than he'd ever imagined. Chapter 2. The Search for Answers. Jason barely remembered his trek back to the human encampment, his body racked with pain. Once there, medics worked quickly to tend to his wounds, while his comrades, grim and silent, listened as he recounted his encounter with the Draconian commander. "A Draconian spared you," one of his squad mates scoffed. "You sure you didn't hit your head too hard out there?" But Jason was resolute. He had looked into the eyes of his enemy and seen something he never expected: hesitation, even respect. Determined to make sense of it, he began digging through the Federation archives for any insights into Draconian culture, particularly the Amazon warriors. In his research, he discovered that the Draconians valued strength, not just in physical prowess, but in courage and resilience, even in their enemies. Had his defiance impressed Zyra? Had he unknowingly earned her respect? His conviction grew as he found scattered accounts of Draconian warriors showing mercy in rare instances, dismissed by most as hallucinations or flukes. His obsession with understanding Zyra's actions puzzled and irritated his superiors, who insisted he focus on the mission at hand. But Jason couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter had changed something, both in him and perhaps in her. As the conflict with the Draconians continued, Jason was eventually sent back into battle, his pulse rifle and armor repaired, but he now carried a new resolve. With a sense of purpose that went beyond survival, he knew his path was intertwined with understanding a warrior who had, against all odds, spared his life. The dense jungles of Terrace 9 crackled with the fierce energy of battle, where each explosion ripped through the verdant canopy, sending shards of trees and earth skyward. The deafening sounds of blaster fire and shattering energy shields filled the air as human and alien forces clashed in a relentless struggle, each side unwilling to yield an inch. Once a lush paradise, Terrace 9 had become a ravaged war zone, its natural beauty now marred by the scars of the conflict between the draconian Amazon Empire and the United Earth Federation. Soldiers from both sides had turned its landscapes into graves, symbols of a war neither faction was willing to abandon. Leading the draconian forces was the formidable Commander Zyra, a warrior feared by even her own. Her violet skin gleamed under the twin suns of Terrace 9, and her armor, adorned with the intricate designs of high rank, shimmered with authority. Towering over 8 feet tall, Zyra exuded strength. Each motion of her powerful frame displayed the results of years of training and brutal combat. As her sharp, predatory eyes scanned the battlefield, she locked onto a human soldier, appearing as fragile as the foliage around him. That soldier, Corporal Jason Cross, stood wounded yet resolute, isolated from his unit and barely holding on to his battered pulse rifle. Despite the scorch marks on his armor and the pain of his injuries, his gaze remained unyielding, challenging the chaos around him and the enemy who'd now spotted him. Zyra saw him as prey, a target to be eliminated without thought. She surged forward, her battle-axe glinting as she prepared a swift, fatal strike. But as she closed in, Jason did something unexpected. He lowered his weapon, holding her gaze with a calmness she hadn't encountered before. His eyes held no fear, only a hardened determination. For the first time, Zyra hesitated, her weapon hovering mere inches from him. What was this strange resolve? "Do it," Jason whispered, his voice steady despite his wounds. Despite the chaos raging around them, he held his ground. Zyra's grip tightened on her axe as her thoughts conflicted. Why wasn't he fighting back? Where was his fear? In that moment, a strange feeling surged within her, a pang of compassion, a spark of curiosity. She could end him with ease, yet something held her back. Was strength merely the power to kill? Or was there honor in recognizing courage, even in a foe? After a tense silence, Zyra released him, her mind awash with uncharted thoughts as she stepped away. Jason, dazed and staggering, could only watch as she disappeared into the shadows of the jungle. He was alive. But why? Chapter 2. The Search for Answers. Jason barely recalled his journey back to the base, his mind swirling as his comrades listened to his story in disbelief. "A draconian spared you," one asked skeptically, while another shook his head. "Did you hit your head a little too hard out there?" But Jason's certainty was unshaken. He had seen something in Zyra's eyes that defied every rule of war he knew. Determined to understand why she had spared him, he pored over Federation archives, scouring every file he could find on draconian customs, particularly those of the Amazon warriors. As he researched, he found traces of a deeply honorable culture. Among the draconians, respect was not merely given, it was earned through displays of strength and bravery, and courage was admired even in enemies. Could his defiance, his refusal to back down, have impressed her? Had he unknowingly proven himself in her eyes? His fixation puzzled his superiors, who urged him to let it go and focus on the mission. But Jason couldn't shake the feeling that his encounter with Zyra had changed him, and perhaps her as well. When orders finally arrived for him to rejoin the front lines, Jason felt an unspoken sense of purpose, a mission that went beyond mere survival. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a man searching for answers in the midst of a brutal war. And as he prepared to face the enemy once more, he knew that his fate was bound to the warrior who, against all odds, had chosen to spare his life. Under the blood-red sky of Terrace 9, Jason Cross found himself haunted by the endless cycle of violence. Night after night, as the camp lay in silence, he questioned the senseless slaughter that both sides had come to accept. If there was any hope of stopping this war, he realized it would have to come from within, from someone like Zyra, a warrior whose actions could bridge the divide. Late one night, driven by a desperate sense of purpose, Jason slipped away from the encampment under the cover of darkness. He moved through the dense jungle, each step a reminder of the risk he was taking. The Federation would label him a traitor if they discovered his intentions, and if the Draconians caught him, they would likely kill him on sight. Yet none of that mattered. He knew this was the only way. The jungle, though scarred by war, still clung to life, its leaves rustling as if trying to reclaim its lost territory. Hours passed as Jason carefully navigated the underbrush, every sound amplified, every shadow a potential threat. His pulse rifle hung unused at his side. This wasn't a mission of combat, but of hope. Finally, as dawn broke, casting an orange glow over the clearing ahead, Jason found himself face to face with the towering figure of Commander Zyra. Her violet skin shimmered under the morning light, her muscular frame a testament to the Amazonian strength she wielded. She stood poised, as if she'd been expecting him all along. "You came," Zyra's voice broke the silence. It was not a question but a statement, acknowledging his arrival without surprise. Jason raised his hands in a gesture of peace, his voice steady. "I had to. We need to talk." Her grip on her battle axe tightened, her sharp eyes narrowing as she assessed him. "Talk? You are human. I am draconian. We are enemies." Jason shook his head. "It doesn't have to be this way, Zyra. This war, it's destroying everything, both our people and this planet. There's no victory here, only loss." Zyra's eyes flashed with skepticism. "Your people do not seek peace. They seek conquest, just as mine do." A bitter smile crossed Jason's face. "You're not wrong. But just because that's what our leaders want doesn't mean we have to keep fighting." He gestured to the scorched earth around them. "Look around. We're killing this world and each other. For what? Resources? Territory? It's not worth it." A silence fell between them as Zyra's gaze softened. She seemed to be grappling with an internal conflict, the same one Jason had glimpsed in her eyes during their first encounter. She was a warrior, raised to fight without question, but something about his words stirred doubt within her. "You speak with passion," she said finally, her voice softer. "But words do not end wars. Blood does." Jason's expression hardened. "That's where you're wrong. We can stop this, but only if we work together. You and me." For a moment, the absurdity of his proposal seemed to overwhelm her. An alliance between a draconian and a human? It is madness. "Maybe it is," he admitted, stepping closer. "But maybe that's exactly what we need. Our leaders won't listen, but if we don't try, more people will die. Draconians, humans, it'll never stop. Is that what you want?" Zyra's hand relaxed on her axe, and she looked down, the weight of his words settling over her. When she met his gaze again, her eyes held a glimmer of something he hadn't seen before, a spark of hope mingled with uncertainty. What would you do if the quietest corner of the galaxy turned into the gateway for something unknown? The outpost of Verdun lay on the furthest edges of human-colonized space, a dusty and overlooked settlement where daily life was measured in routines. Tucked away on the remote planet of Grays 5, Verdun was isolated, surrounded by a sprawling ancient forest so thick with towering trees that their branches wove together, forming a canopy that rarely let sunlight touch the ground. To those who lived there, miners, engineers, a handful of biologists, the planet's eerie beauty was a rugged charm and an escape from the chaos of the central colonies. Life in Verdun was often mundane, punctuated only by the occasional arrival of supply shuttles every few months. For many settlers, this remoteness was ideal, a true escape. But the peace they'd grown to appreciate was shattered one fateful evening. It began subtly, as a low rumble echoing through the ground, making the very earth beneath their feet tremble. Settlers paused in their routines, initially brushing it off as yet another minor quake. Grays 5 was notorious for its unpredictable tectonics. But when the rumble swelled into a deafening roar and the sky began to dim, fear crept in. From the west, a blinding streak of light slashed through the sky, leaving a blazing trail. This wasn't a meteor. It moved with a deliberate, unnatural grace. As it plummeted toward the forest, the settlers realized they were witnessing something far beyond the ordinary. The object crashed into the dense forest with an explosive boom, sending a shockwave that flattened trees and rattled windows across Verdun. Dark smoke billowed from the forest, casting an ominous shadow over the canopy. Silence fell over the outpost, thick and uneasy, before the murmurs began. Some claimed it was an alien invasion, others a military test gone horribly wrong. Rumors spread like wildfire, stirring panic among the settlers. Verdun's council scrambled for answers, sending a surveillance drone to investigate. But moments after the drone ventured into the forest, its signal was lost, vanishing without explanation. In hushed voices, people speculated. The tale of the original settlers who had vanished centuries ago without a trace surfaced once more, their fates unknown and whispered about only in the dead of night. For Dne Malik, however, this was what he'd been waiting for his entire life. Unlike the miners and engineers around him, Dne was a xenobiologist, drawn to Grays 5 not by duty but by a relentless curiosity. While others saw Grays 5's dangers, he saw its mysteries, and now, with the crash of an unknown craft, he felt a thrill he had only dreamed of. This was his chance. As Verdun buzzed with nervous anticipation, D&E packed his equipment with shaky hands, a translator, sensors, and tools that had long awaited their purpose. He knew the risks, but this was no ordinary event. If this was truly an alien encounter, it would be the single greatest discovery in human history. A knock at his door jolted him from his thoughts. Commander Riggs, the outpost's head of security, stood in the doorway, his face etched with worry. Built like a fortress, Riggs had always viewed D&E's role as frivolous, a bookworm with no place on a frontier like this. But tonight, even Riggs seemed unsettled. "Don't tell me you're going out there," Riggs rumbled, his voice tinged with uncharacteristic concern. D&E glanced at his pack, his eyes blazing with conviction. "I have to, Commander. If there's a chance to make contact, we can't just ignore it." Riggs' face hardened. "We've already lost a drone, and a team. Whatever's out there, it's nothing we've encountered before. And it could be hostile." D&E held Riggs' gaze, unyielding. "That's exactly why I need to go. What if they need help? We won't know until we try." After a long silence, Riggs let out a resigned sigh. "Fine. But you're on your own. I'm not sending anyone after you." D&E nodded, accepting the risk. "I wouldn't expect you to." As the commander departed, D&E finished packing, his anticipation tempered by a pang of fear. But the thrill of discovery overpowered the apprehension gnawing at his mind. Pulling on his gear, he stepped outside, feeling the cold night air prickling his skin. The smoke from the crash was still visible in the distance, a haunting column against the backdrop of stars. With only the faint light of his handheld scanner, D&E started toward the forest. The wilderness was eerily quiet, as if the forest itself sensed an unnatural presence. Every step felt weighted, the gravity of the unknown pressing down on him. After an hour's hike, he reached the crash site. The alien vessel lay half buried in the earth, its hull shimmering with a strange iridescence. Strange symbols etched into its surface glowed faintly in the dark. D&E's breath caught as he approached, each step revealing more of the craft's alien beauty and sheer enormity. As he reached out to touch the warm metal, a sudden growl emanated from within, low and guttural, reverberating through the silent night. His spine tingled with both fear and exhilaration. Something was alive in there. Something waiting. Whatever it was, D&E knew there was no turning back. Out on the distant fringes of human-colonized space sat Verdun Outpost, a forgotten settlement on the remote planet Grays 5. Life here was routine, the landscape ruggedly beautiful, shrouded in dense, ancient forests that few dared to explore. For the miners, engineers, and scientists, it was an escape, a welcome isolation far from the chaos of the central colonies. But one evening, the outpost's peaceful monotony was shattered. It began subtly, a faint rumble echoing through the ground, barely noticed at first. Then it grew louder, transforming into a deep, resonating roar that seemed to darken the very sky. From the western horizon, a brilliant streak of light tore across the heavens, its controlled descent hinting at something far beyond a mere meteor. This object didn't plummet to the planet's surface, it landed with purpose, crashing into the dense forests that surrounded Verdun. A thunderous boom followed, shaking the settlement to its foundations. A dark, ominous plume of smoke rose from the crash site, casting an eerie shadow over the treetops. As silence returned, the outpost's residents began to murmur, each trying to rationalize the impossible. Was this an alien invasion? A military test gone wrong? Their imaginations ran wild, stirring a creeping unease. Verdun's council hastily dispatched a surveillance drone to investigate. Minutes later, the drone's signal vanished without a trace, fueling rumors and reviving long-forgotten legends of early settlers who had mysteriously disappeared centuries before. The whispers spread, fanning the flames of fear. But for D&E Malik, this was what he had been waiting for his entire life. Unlike the miners and engineers, D&E was a xenobiologist, driven by curiosity and the dream of discovering the unknown. The mysteries of Grays 5 had called to him, and now, with this crash, he felt an electric thrill he had only imagined. This was his chance. As Verdun buzzed with nervous anticipation, D&E gathered his equipment, translator, sensors, and specialized tools, and prepared to venture into the unknown. He knew the risks, but this was no ordinary discovery. If this was an alien encounter, it would be the single most significant moment in human history. A sudden knock at his door broke his focus. Standing there was Commander Riggs, Verdun's head of security, a hardened man who had always dismissed D&E's work as bookish nonsense. But tonight, even Riggs looked unsettled. "Don't tell me you're planning to go out there," Riggs muttered, his usual gruff demeanor edged with worry. D&E met Riggs' gaze, determination blazing in his eyes. "I have to, Commander. If there's a chance for contact, we can't ignore it." Riggs shook his head, frustration barely masking his fear. "We already lost a drone and a team out there. Whatever that is, it's not anything we've ever seen, and it could be dangerous." D&E's voice was firm. "That's exactly why I need to go. We won't know anything until we try." After a long silence, Riggs sighed. "Fine. But if you're going, you're on your own. Don't expect any backup." D&E nodded, accepting the risk. "I wouldn't expect anything else." As Riggs turned and left, D&E's excitement mingled with a creeping sense of dread. He pulled on his gear and stepped into the cold night. The distant column of smoke was a haunting beacon against the night sky, pulling him forward. With only the faint light of his handheld scanner, he began his journey through the forest. The silence was unsettling, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. After an hour of hiking, D&E reached the crash site. The alien vessel lay half buried in the earth, its hull shimmering with an iridescent glow. Strange symbols, glowing faintly in the darkness, adorned its surface. D&E's breath caught in his throat. Whatever this was, it wasn't human. Every step brought him closer to the craft's alien beauty and incomprehensible magnitude. He reached out, hesitating, and then brushed his hand against the warm metal. Suddenly, a deep, guttural growl echoed from within, vibrating through the silent night. His spine tingled with both terror and excitement. Something was alive in there. And D&E knew, at that moment, there was no turning back. "They want to destroy us." The words trembled in D&E's voice as he watched the fleet looming above. Riggs, the hardened commander, turned his gaze on him, his expression a blend of skepticism and grim determination. "You better be right about this, Malik." Swallowing the lump in his throat, D&E stepped forward, leaving the anxious murmurs of the settlement behind. He walked to the edge of the blast zone, where the earth still smoldered from the lead ship's warning shot. Above, the massive vessel hung like a dark omen, casting its shadow over him. D&E took a deep breath, then raised his hands, palms open, a universal sign of peace. "We're not your enemy," he shouted, his voice carrying through the thick silence. "We didn't attack your scout." For a long, heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. D&E could feel the collective breath of the settlement held tight, every eye on him. Then, gradually, the blinding light from the lead ship began to dim, the rumble of its engines quieting. The ship seemed to drift back slightly, as if reconsidering its next move. Beside him, the alien raised its own hand, mirroring D&E's gesture. Its many eyes glowed with a faint light, and for the first time, D&E felt a calm settle over him. This creature wasn't merely a scout, it was a bridge, a living link between their species. The silence was thick, charged with tension, but then, as if on a shared decision, the alien ships began to retreat, their sleek forms rising back into the sky. The rumble of engines faded into the distance, and the lead ship's light disappeared. It was over. D&E let out a shaky breath, his body sagging with relief. The alien beside him lowered its hand, its posture relaxing as it clicked softly, a sound that felt like approval. In that moment, D&E understood. They hadn't just prevented an attack. They'd made contact. Commander Riggs approached, his face a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. "I don't know how you pulled that off, Malik," he muttered, shaking his head. "But you just saved this settlement." D&E offered a weak smile, glancing at the alien. "I didn't do it alone. We did it together." The alien clicked again, a quiet, thoughtful sound. It cast a glance toward the sky, where its people had disappeared, a faint glow still lingering in its eyes. D&E knew this was only the beginning. Humanity had just crossed a threshold, one that could change the course of its existence. Commander Riggs's voice broke through his thoughts. "All right, Malik," he said, his tone steely, "you've bought us some time. But that doesn't mean the threat's over. Those ships could come back any moment. What do we do now?" D&E's eyes shifted back to the alien beside him, its gaze fixed on him, trust evident in its posture. "We need to keep talking, Commander. This was a misunderstanding. If we can clear it up, maybe we can avoid a full-scale war." Riggs raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. You think they're just going to let bygones be bygones? That they'll forget they were ready to vaporize us? D&E took a steadying breath, glancing at the alien. It's not about forgetting, it's about finding common ground. The alien trusted me enough to help stop this attack. We need to build on that. Riggs rubbed his chin, his brow furrowing. All right, say you're right. Say they're not planning to strike again. How are we supposed to negotiate with them? The memory of the alien's control room flickered in D&E's mind. The symbols, the star maps. There had to be a way to communicate. We need to go back to the ship, he said, determination hardening his voice. If there's any technology we can use to reach their fleet, it'll be there. Riggs scowled, clearly wary of the idea, but before he could argue, the alien stepped forward, gesturing toward the forest and letting out a low, cooperative hum. D&E nodded at the creature, understanding. It's telling us the same thing. The ship holds the answers. Commander Riggs studied them both, his arms crossed, expression grim. After a heavy silence, he nodded. Fine. But I'm sending a team with you. If this is a trap. It's not, D&E interjected firmly. We have to trust each other if we're going to survive this. With Riggs's reluctant approval, D&E and the alien led a small group back into the forest, tension thickening with each step. The soldiers cast wary glances at the towering creature beside them, their weapons held close. Yet D&E felt a strange assurance. The alien walked alongside them not as a threat, but as an ally. When they reached the ship, its twisted hull shimmered faintly in the dim light, the breach from the crash still open. This is it, D&E said, glancing at the alien. If there's any way to communicate with the fleet, we'll find it here. Inside the control room, the alien moved swiftly, its clawed fingers dancing over the controls. The console lights flared to life, humming softly as if awakening from a deep sleep. D&E watched in awe as the alien navigated the interface, eventually pulling up a live feed from one of the fleet's ships. The screen filled with shadowed figures, their eyes fixed on him from across the void. D&E's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the moment of truth. We are not your enemies, he said, his voice trembling. The crash was an accident. We want peace. The silence that followed was agonizing, each second feeling like an eternity. Then, one of the figures stepped forward, its form similar to the alien beside him, its eyes piercing. It raised a hand, and symbols appeared on the monitor. D&E turned to his alien companion, who stepped forward, translating the message. We have heard your message. Stand down. We will not attack. Relief washed over D&E, and he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The fleet had listened. The alien clicked softly, its eyes glowing with quiet satisfaction. They'd achieved the impossible. They'd averted war. Together, they made their way out of the ship, emerging into the first light of dawn. Verdon's forest seemed to exhale in peace as if the whole planet had been holding its breath. Looking up, D&E couldn't help but wonder at the future. This alien alliance had saved countless lives today. Perhaps it would pave the way for something greater. And as he glanced at the stars, he knew that humanity's journey into the unknown was just beginning.